Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar session. So today's session is going to be a deep dive into our new cameras feature in VideoScribe for browser. So this feature will be perfect for anyone that is interested in learning more about the new feature. So maybe you're a VideoScribe for desktop user and you want to find out what the browser version is like. Or maybe you're a browser user who wants to learn how to use the new cameras feature. But either way, this should be a very useful session, and hopefully as well, you'll leave today confident enough to try out the new cameras feature and also use it in your animated videos. So before we get started today, we will be recording the session, and tomorrow you'll receive an email with a link to the recording so that you can rewatch it at a time that suits you. So don't worry if you do need to leave early, as you can rewatch from tomorrow. And we also do have our Q&A box open. It's open now, so you can pop your questions in there, and Chris, who's joined me today, will be answering these live at the end. We're going to try and leave about 10 minutes for the Q&A, so I would advise getting your questions in early, but we will try and get through as many as we can at the end of the session. And any that we don't get round to, we will send you an email after the webinar, either today or tomorrow, just answering a question for you. Okay, cool. So we're going to go to the next slide. And we're just going to introduce ourselves before we get into the session. So my name's Clemmy and I work in the marketing team at VideoScribe. So my role here is mostly content creation. And this is content creation across our social channels, our blog, and also our emails as well. And today I'm joined by Chris, who I'll pass over to now just to introduce himself.
Thank you, Clemmy. Hi, everyone. I'm Chris. I'm the lead product manager here at VideoScribe. My role consists of speaking with you, our customers, to understand how you're using VideoScribe and how we can make it better for you. I then work with our design and development team to make changes and improvements based on those conversations.
Nice. Okay, so we're going to go to our agenda now. So just before we get into the session, I'm just going to quickly give you guys a quick overview of what we're going to be covering today. So I'm going to start off by just giving us an overview of the new cameras feature, so what it is, and also just what some of the benefits are. And then I'm going to hand over to Chris, and he's going to be giving us a live demo of the new feature. So in this demo, he will take us through some of the functionality of cameras, and also just go through, tips and tricks for using them and how you can use them in your own videos. And then we will have that Q&A session. So like I mentioned, just make sure that you put your questions in, and we will get around to those at the end. Okay, so to start off, we're going to just go over what the cameras feature is. So this will hopefully help give you guys a good overview of it. So yeah, in a nutshell, cameras gives you the ability to zoom in and out of elements on your canvas. So we've also given you a larger canvas to work with as well. So this just gives you more space to pan around, gives you more space to add in elements, so such as images. So you just have a lot more room to play with, which is good. And Chris, in the demo, will show us the extended canvas in more detail. So if we're not really sure sort of what that means, he'll show you later how much bigger it's been made and what the benefits of that are. So another good, a quick overview as well is that you can also add multiple cameras to the canvas as well. So you can zoom into different elements at different times. So for example, you could zoom into an element as it draws onto the screen. And Chris again later will show us how to add a camera in his demo, how to add multiple cameras, and he'll also go through zooming into different elements, and just show us how to add variety to our videos as well. So that's just a brief overview of what the cameras feature is. So now let's just go over a couple of the benefits that it brings. So cameras is really a great way to make your videos more dynamic and more engaging as well. So you can use cameras to guide the viewer's attention and make a particular element really stand out, which is really useful. So another good feature and benefit of the camera is that it helps to create professional looking videos. So it adds a really nice level of professionalism to your videos. It enables you to create, smooth camera movements, and this just enhances the overall quality of your videos. And therefore that is going to elevate the perception of your content. So it's going to look a lot more professional from the outside. Cameras as well, it gives you a really good level of creative freedom. So you can experiment with angles and perspectives. So this will help to encourage innovation, and also it will enable you to differentiate your video content from others and make it look more interesting and just different from other people's content out there. And the last benefit that I'll talk about is visual interest. So the ability to control the camera position really brings a good visual interest to your videos. You can experiment, like I mentioned, with angles and perspectives to keep your audience more engaged. So for example, it could be a close-up shot if you want to emphasize something, or it could be a wide angle view for more context. But the camera just gives you the ability to keep your viewer engaged, and just add more interest to your videos. So that's just a few of the benefits. And I'm now going to hand over to Chris, who's going to share his screen and take us on a live demo of the new cameras feature.
Thank you, Clemmy. So I'm just going to switch to VideoScribe for browser. Hopefully everyone can see that okay. So I'm going to use a template to showcase and explain the functionality of the new cameras feature and how cameras can be used to make your video more engaging, more professional, and to generally keep your audience's attention for longer. I'm going to use the template called New Product Feature Service, as this has a number of different scenes, so I can show how both the scenes and cameras can work together. We'll focus on how you can keep your audience engaged by using cameras to emphasize key points within your project and create movement throughout the video. So the template has been loaded, but before I jump into showing the functionality of cameras and how to use them, I just want to mention that along with adding the camera functionality, we have made a change to the canvas as well, as Clemmy mentioned. Previously, the canvas was quite small. It was literally the size of what you can see now. So there wasn't much room to have a lot of content in one scene. You were really quite limited, and because there were no cameras, your video was very static. You couldn't move around the canvas or zoom in and zoom out of elements either. However, that has all changed. If I zoom out using the minus button in the bottom right-hand corner of this floating menu, you can see that the canvas is much, much larger. As Clemmy mentioned, it's 49 times larger, actually. And using my trackpad, I can now move around the canvas quite easily. So I'm not resigned to just using this space on the canvas. I can create everywhere, basically. So with this update, you'll be able to fit a lot more content in one scene and generally have more space to use, making it a lot easier to manage. With that in mind, with the new camera feature and the increased canvas size, we've slightly changed the concept of how VideoScribe for your browser works, hopefully making it even better and much more dynamic. But what do I actually mean by that? So as I mentioned previously, the canvas was on one size and the output video was just the fixed view or shot of your canvas. So it was just fixed. What you would see within your scene is what you would get in your downloaded video. So essentially the canvas was the camera. Now that we have added cameras, we have changed that and basically separated the canvas from the camera. So the canvas is now just the canvas, and the cameras will define what you see in the output video. I hope I've explained that well enough, but it should all become clearer as I go through showing and explaining how cameras work. So moving on to cameras. As I just mentioned, cameras now define what you see in the output video. So when you start a new project, the starting camera by default will already be set. And the starting camera is just the first element in your timeline, labeled as C1 or camera 1. So the starting camera is the area of the canvas that will be in the view at the beginning of your video. So at the moment, my first shot is going to be within the borders of this pink camera. I'm just going to preview this quickly, just so you can see the starting view and kind of have a bit of context of where we're starting. And then once I change the cameras, you can kind of see how that's all going to work. So here you can see that it just kind of includes all the content that you can see here. As a note, the starting camera cannot be deleted or rearranged on the timeline because you always need to have a starting shot. You need to start somewhere. However, it can be repositioned and resized on the canvas itself. So I have the starting camera selected. You can resize the camera on the canvas by selecting the corners and dragging the box to your desired size. So it doesn't have to be this size to start with. It can be whatever size you like. To move the camera, hover your mouse anywhere within the camera bounding box and click to hold and then drag the box around, just like how you would move your elements around. So if I move my camera over here, only these elements within the camera bounding box will be shown at the beginning of the video. If an element is out of this camera view, then this will not be shown. So in this situation, I won't have the introducing text, we wouldn't have the logo, we wouldn't have this tagline, and it would be cutting off this bit of text as well. However, I don't want that to be the view at the beginning of this video, so I'm just going to reposition it, resize it, and for the purpose of this, I'm actually just going to focus on the logo itself and the animation of the logo as well. So again, if I preview from here, then you can see that the starting shot would have changed, and it's actually just focusing purely on the logo. And you will notice that the other elements now are animating outside of your view because I only have one camera, I have one view, we can't see anything else. That will change, and I'll get to that additional part of adding cameras in a minute. So one thing to note about cameras is that the aspect ratio of the camera position is locked and it cannot be changed. So this will be the aspect ratio that you selected for your video when you created your project. This project is landscape aspect ratio, or 16:9. So the camera is fixed to be landscape. If you selected a portrait or a square, then the camera will be a portrait or a square shape. So you'll always be able to know just by the shape of your camera. Another thing to note is that when you create projects, the canvas size remains the same no matter which output aspect ratio you selected. So it's really important that you do use cameras to control the output of your video. So moving on to actually adding cameras. So to add cameras, you literally just click on this button on the left-hand panel labeled camera. You can add as many cameras as you want to your project. There is literally no technical limitation that we have put in. Now, before I actually add a camera and show you kind of how it works, it's important to note that depending on what element is selected, determines where the camera will be added to a different place on the timeline. So I'll show you what I mean by that. So if I deselect this camera, I now have no elements or cameras selected at all. If I add a camera, it's going to be added to the end of the timeline, to the last element after the last element. That's the same way it works with elements as well. If a camera is selected and I add a camera, the new camera will be added after the selected camera. So you can see that before I had 3 cameras, it's added a third, it's come after. However, if an element is selected, the camera will be added before the selected element, which is slightly different. The reason for that is that the camera will be in place ready for the element to animate and appear. If the camera was after this star, then the star would appear and it would animate before the camera has actually moved to the position of where it is going to animate. I hope that's clear. But all I would say is please just have a play around, get used to how it works. It will save you a lot of time in the future. So moving on to camera settings. Now, in the same way that elements have different settings and edit options, so do cameras. When the camera is selected, you can edit the camera settings in the right-hand panel, exactly the same as elements. So we have up here, first of all, is actually a button called Set Camera to Fit the Current View. If I just resize this camera, you can see that this button now becomes enabled. If I click that button, it's going to set the camera to be the size of what my current view is. If I zoom out a bit more and press the button again, the button zooms, the camera zooms out and is resized. So if I do that again, then again, it focuses on my view. If the camera is already set to my current view, then this button is disabled because it's not going to do anything. We then have the width and height fields, and this is just to manually input the size of your selected camera. So this really is just an alternative to resizing it on the canvas. As you can see, when I resize it on the canvas, the values in the right-hand panel change accordingly. This icon here, just next to the input fields, is just to indicate that the values are aspect ratio locked. So for example, when I change the width, the height is going to change accordingly. It's just a fixed ratio. We then have the duration setting. This is to set how long the camera movement will take from the previous camera position. So in my timeline, the previous or first camera position is C1, and my second is C2. So this duration setting is just defining how long it's going to take to transition or move from this position to that position. So essentially, if I put that camera there, from C1 to C2, it's going to take 1 second to zoom out. And then we have the pause setting. This is to set how long to pause after the camera movement and before the next animation starts. And again, this works in the same way as pause does for elements. We then have the transform options, which are quite simple, but really quite useful as well. So the lock icon allows you to lock the camera to the canvas so it can't be moved. I'm clicking and dragging and nothing is happening. That's the same way as you can lock elements on the canvas as well. The pin icon is new. So by default, the camera element needs to be selected for you to see where the camera is actually looking at. So if I deselect the camera, I can't see any of my cameras or where it's being pointed. If I select the camera, I can see where it is. With the pin, what you can do is if I select that, it actually means that the camera is going to be visible all the time. So here I don't have anything selected, but I can see the outline of the camera. That's from the right-hand panel. There's also a pin icon on the bounding box as well. So, you know, if you're further away, you don't need to go over to the edit panel. You can just do it straight from here. There's also this pin icon in the top action bar as well. So this essentially will pin and unpin every camera that you have in your scene. The pin icon is really useful for a couple of different reasons. So firstly, you can easily see the flow of your video. Obviously here I've only got 2 cameras, but I can quite easily see that I've got camera 1 here and camera 2 there. So I know that it's going to focus here and then zoom out to this position. If I had a more complicated scene and I had, you know, elements and images over here, over in the top right, down in the bottom right, and I had different cameras in different positions, I'd be able to see how it essentially moves around the canvas. Secondly, it's also really useful just to be able to line up your elements within the camera as well. So, you know, rather than actually being zoomed in and then doing it that way, if you're zoomed out, you can still see what's happening. In this example, you know, I could select these and I can move them around and I know how to kind of center them within that camera itself. So that's actually kind of the functionality of the camera feature in VideoScribe. I can appreciate I went through a few different things. So what I'll do next is really just for a couple of minutes add some cameras to this scene and to the next scene in this video, just to show how they can be used to bring a little bit more movement into this video as a whole. And as Clemmy mentioned, if you have any questions, feel free to pop them into the chat and we'll answer some of them at the end in a minute. So going back to this scene, I have my first camera, which is focused on the logo, which is what I want, which is great. But what I want to do is just zoom out a little bit, just so that it then, you know, gives a little bit of movement, includes the introducing text, and then I actually then just want another camera so that I can zoom out a little bit more and then include the stars and the rest of the text as well. It's not a big change, but it will give it a little bit of movement, a little bit of focus, and just keep the user's attention that little bit more. So if I then just preview this, then we can just see how it will initially focus on the animation of the logo. Moving that up actually put the camera in the wrong place. So again, if I just do that, then it's actually going to move before it gets animated. So that's obviously just quite simple. This example is a little bit more. So here we have two options for, say, a feature or two different features or two different services. So at the moment, the camera is just focused on both options, which again would be fine. You know, we have the text and the elements and the images that will animate, and that brings a bit of movement. But for this, what would be great is to actually just focus on option 1 first, then focus on option 2, so that you're really just grabbing the user's attention and making sure they are focused on each individual piece and not having that noise around them. And then you can zoom out at the end to show both options, so that then there's a comparison that the audience can make as well. So to do that, it's really quite simple. I select C1, which is first camera in view in the scene even. And if I just position that, that's roughly central. If I then select the option 2 text, what I can do is I can add a camera, and it will get added before that is animated. So before that in the timeline, so that it's going to be in the right position for when it actually animates. And if I position this here, it's good for option 2, but what I can see is that this part is going to be in view of this second camera as well. And I don't actually want that. I just want it to be a little bit cleaner. So what I can do is if I select C2, if I hold Shift on my keyboard and then select the last element in the timeline, it's going to select every element in between. So now what I can do is just move that over slightly. I can make the background a little bit bigger. It covers that. And if I zoom to fit that, then what I can see is I've got C1 there. Now C2, it's all nice and clean. Previously, with a fixed canvas size and much smaller, I wouldn't have been able to do that. And obviously without cameras, I wouldn't be able to do this either. So now I've got camera 1 on option 1, camera 2 on option 2. What I actually want to do is then have a camera at the end to zoom out. So I've deselected everything. I know if I select add camera, it's going to add it to the end. I can then just slightly, reposition this. And then if I turn all cameras on, what I can see here is I've got camera 1 view, pans down to camera 2, and then zooms out to camera 3. And if I just preview from this scene, then we can see how that works. So here we've got the animation of option 1. So the user's really focused on this option. It then pans down to option 2. Again, make sure that the user's focused on this and not something else. And then it zooms out to give a comparison between the two. Now, I could have done all of that in a single canvas, in a single scene. And that would be great because I'd be able to use the camera, I'd be able to pan around. And then if I wanted, I could zoom out and enclose everything that I have in a single scene, and that would be great. But what I can do is, obviously with scenes, we have scene transitions, which are just a different animation, different transition, and you can use that in combination with cameras to make things actually really quite cool, really engaging. But it is going to be very dependent and contextual as to when you use those. So all I would recommend is just to have a play around with cameras, combine it with scenes and the scene transitions, and see what you can produce. And that's it from me, I think, Clemmy.
Okay, great. Well, that was a really great demo, and hopefully everyone watching, hopefully you've learned a lot more about cameras, how to use them, and the benefits as well. So yeah, we have got a few questions already. So we'll get onto those in a minute. But we wanted to give you guys a discount code just to say thank you for joining us. So if you use the code webinar25, you can get 25% off annual plans. If you do have any additional questions or you want to reach out to us, then you can just reach us on marketing@sparkle.com. And if you're not a VideoScribe user already, you can also get a free trial on our website. So if you just go to videoscribe.co, you can there access a free trial. And then you can also purchase a plan using the discount as well. So let's start with a few of the questions that we've had. So there is a question here which I think was maybe asked before we covered this. Someone has asked, can you change the camera ratio? Obviously you did mention that
Yes, so at the moment, unfortunately not. So once you have selected your project, it is going to be fixed to that ratio. We are aware that, you're going to have different audiences in different platforms, but you're going to want to cover the same kind of topics and the same content and essentially reuse some projects. So we are aware that is something that is going to be really valuable for you. It's something that we do want to do, and we will work through it just to make it a lot easier. As a workaround, what you can do is you can create a new project from blank in that different aspect ratio, and you can actually copy and paste scenes from one project to another. It's not perfect because things aren't going to be in the perfect place, but it should hopefully be a workaround until we actually can do that kind of from within the project itself.
Yeah. I've just seen as well, I think someone just raised their hand, but we can't unmute anyone in this webinar. If you did raise your hand to ask a question, if you could just put it in the Q&A box, we'll answer it as we go through these. And then we've had one question asked twice. So I think there's a bit of confusion. Is this only for browser? Is it for desktop as well?
Yes, so cameras are actually already available in desktop. It's just done in a slightly different way. So in the desktop application, you set your camera basically using a little button in the bottom right-hand corner of the user interface. So when you've moved to a position on the canvas, you click that button, and then that kind of fixes the camera view for that specific element. So that is how cameras work in desktop. For browser, which is what I've just demoed, that's kind of the functionality in browser. So they do work in different ways. And the reason for that is that desktop came first, and we essentially listened to our customers and our users, and we basically just decided to solve the problem and provide a solution in a different way. Hopefully it's easier, but you can do both. You can use cameras in both desktop and browser, but just in slightly different ways.
Okay, great. And we've had another couple of a question which was sort of asked twice. Is it recommended to use browser or desktop version of the app? I guess if you had to recommend one, or would you recommend browser for a certain sort of type of project and desktop for another type of project?
Yeah, so I think it really kind of depends on you in terms of how you like to work and where you work, but also what kind of video you want to create as well. So, with the desktop application being an application, it means that you can have an offline mode, you can work on the go, and it's not going to kind of kill your internet or take up bandwidth, shall I say. Whereas the browser is obviously only on browser, so you need to have an internet connection, you need to be connected, and isn't quite designed for that on the go. So that's kind of more situational. In terms of the style of video that you want to produce, again, it kind of really just depends. So the browser is, it has scenes, and now it has cameras. So, that does give a little bit more flexibility in terms of the style and what you want to create, whereas the desktop is just a single canvas, so essentially one scene which you then kind of roam around. There's a slight difference in functionality. So at the moment the browser does not have the audio library that the desktop has, so there isn't a raft of tracks that you can choose from within the product. And then there are some kind of minor kind of differences as well, just in terms of the types of editing that you can do with regards to images. So in the desktop, you can do a little bit more finer grain editing of images, and there are slightly different animation types as well. So in the desktop, you can animate for text, specifically for text, whereas in the browser, all animations apply to all elements. So there's not that kind of specificity to it. So I'm not sure if it comes down to recommending one or the other. I like the browser because I do find that it's quicker, and now with cameras it does give that flexibility, and I do find it quicker to work with. But I think it really just comes down to the situation you're in and what you're trying to produce.
Yeah. And someone asked as well that they said they currently use desktop. And is there sort of any reasons why they should use browser? But I feel like you sort of answered that in that answer. So hopefully that will answer their question. And the last question I can see, someone has just asked if the recording will be available. Yes, this is being recorded and we will send it round tomorrow. So you'll get an email with the recording, so you can rewatch it then. Okay, I think that is okay. We've got one more question we'll just cover. Will exit animations be added to the desktop version?
At the moment, it's not planned, but it's something that we can always look into. It does always come down to time and priorities and focusing our attention on the most important things. So, would love to understand a little bit more. If feel free to email myself or Clemmy or support to, give us feedback and to kind of signal your intention or your feature request so that we can kind of help to prioritize that.
Okay, great. That's all we have time for today, but thank you so much everyone for tuning in. Obviously you can reach out to us again if you do have any further questions, anything you want clarifying, you can reach us on marketing@sparkle.com and we'll get back to you. So yeah, thank you, and thank you, Chris, for joining me. That was really insightful. Hopefully everyone took a lot away from it as well. And we'll see you guys next time. Bye everyone.